for coming today. We have a wonderful panel, the second installment in our Career ExpLAWration series. Today's topic is public interest law. And so to get started, I want to introduce our panelists. If you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to ask each of you to share your name, what law school you went to, and the name of your organization, if you don't mind. Jacqueline, would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thank you, Alex. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here. My name is Jacqueline Scott. I attended Vanderbilt Law School. I graduated in 2019, but I'm also a Vanderbilt undergrad alum. I graduated from Vanderbilt undergrad in 2016. And I currently work at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, where I serve as an assistant district attorney in the trial division.
Leah, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Leah Watson. I attended Vanderbilt. Now I don't want to say the year after going after Jacqueline, but I graduated from Vanderbilt in 2006, and I went to Harvard Law School, where I graduated in 2011. I'm a senior staff attorney in the Racial Justice Program at ACLU National International Office.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Evan McCants Goldman. I went to Vanderbilt for undergraduate in 2014. I graduated there, and I went to NYU Law, graduating in 2018. I am a staff attorney for the Legal Aid Society, specifically doing criminal defense for parole revocation hearings.
That's awesome. Thank you all so much. And yeah, you might have caught the common thread here. These are all Vanderbilt undergraduate students, or at one time were Vanderbilt undergraduate students. And so the amazing things that you hear them talk about today could one day be you. So remember that. So the first question I have for you all, and if there's, I might just keep it with the same order. It's always weird with three people and like, oh, who's going next? If you feel so compelled to speak, by all means, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll probably just keep up with the Jacqueline, Leah, Evan order. But can you tell us, to you, what exactly is public interest law and what does it look like at your organization?
Sure. So public interest or public service, being in the public sector, that field of law is really broad, and it can encompass a lot of different practice settings, issue areas, or types of work. You could be doing public interest law by running a pro bono program at a law firm. You could work in the public interest by working for a nonprofit representing people that can't afford counsel themselves. You could work on a specific issue set that affects people's lives and well-being. In my case, I'm kind of more in the public service side of that, where I work for the government. So in my case, I work as an assistant district attorney in Philadelphia. So our office prosecutes almost all of the criminal cases that happen in the city and county of Philadelphia. So we serve about 1.5 million people and prosecute about 40,000 criminal cases per year. So in my setting, I work for a local government, but I represent the state. So public service can mean a lot of different things.
So I would echo everything Jacqueline said about the breadth of public interest law. When I think about it, I mean, this may be a little juvenile, but just thinking about ways that you're using the law to try to help people or to try to support people. I started in big law, and that definitely wasn't our goal there. And so I think the myriad of ways that you are working on behalf of people, trying to help them, is what I think of. Right now, I'm at the ACLU, and the ACLU definitely charges itself with protecting civil liberties. More specifically, my work in the racial justice program falls into a few different buckets, where we're advocating on behalf of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and the issues and circumstances that are disproportionately affecting them. So my work really focuses on the criminalization of poverty, which is the kind of encapsulates the various ways that people are punished by the criminal legal system simply because they can't afford to pay. In that capacity, I'm normally suing judges and other government entities for penalizing people just because they don't have money. I'm also working on bias in education, and right now working on a challenge to what was deemed, I guess, sold as an anti-critical race theory law in Oklahoma, and also working on digital divide issues during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then I also work on bias in policing, and specifically investigating ways that police are embracing or supportive of white supremacy and what that means on communities of color. There's other things that I'm working on as well. Our racial justice program also covers housing, which I am working on a fair housing case, but we also cover Indigenous justice, a broader array of education, voting, profiling. There's a pretty wide array to what that looks like.
Yes, I definitely agree with everything that was said in terms of the broad scope of what falls under, public interest. I would say anything that is mission driven versus profit driven is likely to be some sort of public interest organization. I work for the Legal Aid Society of New York, which is, the largest provider of legal services to, indigent clients in the city. They operate in all 5 boroughs. They do criminal, they do civil, and there also is a more policy-oriented, divisions within that. And in my day-to-day job, I'm really just focusing on, representing clients who are stuck in a quasi-criminal administrative setting. So as Jacqueline was saying, she's prosecuting cases. I am defending people, and in parole court, because it is a bit lower down than criminal court. There's a really broad range of issues. So my job does grapple with a lot of criminal related allegations and behaviors, but also there's a lot of what I do that is coordinating services for people, trying to make sure that there are proper, help in place for when they are released that will prevent recidivism, and trying to make sure that there's a holistic approach to keeping people out of Rikers Island, where all my clients are unfortunately housed.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing that. I think it was all great definitions of public interest, and really cool to hear the different work that you all are all doing. So you gave us a good idea of like the mission of your work, or what your focus is. But I want to ask, how many hours a week do you work, and how do you actually spend those hours whenever you're defending a client or prosecuting a client? How much of it is research or actually in court, or how are you spending those hours a week?
So I'm sure I can at least speak for my colleagues when my first thought of how many hours do I work was a lot. When you're doing public service or public interest work, you always have more work to be done than you have time for. In my case, my days are exciting but varied. So by background, I mentioned I work as a trial attorney for the Philadelphia DA's office, opposed to an attorney that works on appeals. So after someone has already been found guilty and the case is done, that work is a little more in the office. Sometimes they'll have to go to court for argument, but as a trial attorney, I'm in court every day, trying cases, doing motions, so deciding things before a case. And so those trials can be before a judge, before a jury, and every day is different, depending on what kind of cases I have and what I have the time to prepare for. So in the unit I'm in, I've been in this job for 2.5 years. I prosecute major felony cases. So that includes firearms possession cases, drug delivery, robbery, assaults, shootings where no one is hit or injured. So the work is really varied in terms of the kinds of charges and the kinds of cases. But in a typical day, I arrive to work early in the morning. I do some last minute preparation, and then I head over to the courthouse with whatever cases I have that day. And then I never really know when I'm going to be done in court. Sometimes things are quick, sometimes they take a long time. But the general structure of my day is going to court in the morning and then doing preparation in the afternoon. So that can be reading cases, calling witnesses, whether those are civilian witnesses or police officers. And I do some writing when I'm writing something to the court. But in the position I am now, it's more about being in court and being on my feet and practicing those trial skills. I had one, work thing that was unusual, but is the whole reason why we do this job. I had my first jury trial this past week. So that was a really different type of week and day, where being in the courtroom all day, trying the case in front of the jury. But it was really exciting. It's, kind of the goal as a trial attorney to bring cases to jury.
I would also kind of echo, I probably will say this every time, like Jacqueline said. I feel like my typical week depends. My workload kind of falls into a few different buckets. One bucket that takes up a lot of my time is conducting investigations. So these are issues that I'm looking into and deciding whether or not we will file a lawsuit. I would say that takes up about half of my time. And in conducting investigations, I am leading a team of other attorneys and staff people, and sometimes both in my team within the ACLU and also within coalition partners or working with pro bono counsel sometimes. And in doing the investigations, we're primarily conducting interviews of potential witnesses. We are preparing and chasing people around for public records requests to get information. We are doing media audits and legal research. All of that is kind of pretty prevalent in the investigation phase. Once we've actually filed the litigation, it's all of the things that come with litigation. Last week it was attending status conferences, meeting and conferring with opposing counsel, meeting with our clients, writing briefs, doing research, trying to figure out, refine our strategy now that we're seeing their arguments. And then the third bucket of what I do is sometimes just around public education. There's definitely public education at each stage, actually, in investigations, also in the litigation, but the public education and also an internal facing role where I sit on internal working groups within the ACLU, because I am in the national office. We want to make sure that we are crafting our strategies and our approaches with a lens, with an eye towards racial justice, amongst other things. And so there are COVID working groups to try to figure out what our position is on the vaccine or what our position is on treatment, now that has become certain treatment methods, now that they're more limited. It's also consulting with affiliates who are reaching out to us as the industry experts, I guess, as you will, having a broader idea of what's happening around the country. And so that consultation role can happen both with affiliates, it can happen with people at national. Sometimes it's also meeting with other colleagues, like coalition partners, and also journalists to explain things to them. And I would say that piece takes up a lot of my time. When we have the filing due, or recently we had 4 briefs due in one case on the same day, it was kind of insanity just leading up to that. And I was working around the clock. And then when that ended, I kind of took a little bit more of a breather. And so I think generally my day is a mix of those and lots of meetings and working with coalitions so that we're consistently messaging around the issues that we're working on.
Yeah, to again echo everybody else, my days are not easily predictable a lot of the time. So my job is also kind of divided into different buckets. So what I'm handling can range from, what is a preliminary hearing. It operates almost like a parole grand jury, and that involves a lot of trial type skills without really any time to prepare. So sometimes the night before I will get a case assigned for a 9 a.m. hearing, I will then, interview a client and go and, put on as good of a case as I can that could involve a cross-examination of law enforcement, a parole officer, a civilian witness, really anybody who is going to be present. Also, there are what is the arraignment, which also is like a negotiation phase. So if I have had the opportunity to, find mitigation for a particular client, or if they have programming for maybe drug treatment, I can present that to the judge and try to negotiate the best plea of sorts. However, there is a wide range. I have a trial continuing this week where that involved a lot more preparation because we had discovery, which is sometimes rare in parole court, and then there is some legal research that I also have been conducting in preparation for what is going to be like a motion to dismiss during the trial. So there's a lot of different components. A lot of it can be a little luck in terms of how heavy my workload is because sometimes I'll be on a shift to be assigned cases and nothing will come in, or maybe I find that I win at a preliminary hearing and that's one less case to carry on the caseload. But there's not really a good way to predict it. Additionally, I've definitely been working for the Legal Aid Society for about 1.5 years. And during that time, there have been essentially 2 complete overhauls of the rules that we have to, play by. So it's been very interesting to, witness these really, monumental shifts in how, this system that I'm working within is operating. And that has also, for now, definitely decreased the workload. And there's, I'm sure if you ask me, what my days look like a month from now, I will have a very different answer than I do today. So I definitely stay flexible. I also field a lot of client calls and I do video visits. All my work is remote. So, it's been another interesting wrinkle for that time, but I do written advocacy as well for writs of habeas corpus if there has been some infringement on due process rights, or if my client is in a particularly dangerous environment with health conditions. There's some avenues that we can also pursue to try to get them out. But yeah, it's a lot of different balls that we have to juggle in the air in PRDU.
Definitely. Yeah. I love how you all essentially summarize the classic lawyer answer. It depends. Yeah, no, so you'll hear that a lot from my understanding if you go to law school and pursue life and law. Everything you all do sounds so incredibly interesting. So thank you so much for sharing. So you've told us what you do. Now I'm curious to know, what would you say is your favorite part about your job? And then also, what is your least favorite part about your job?
Sure. So I kind of have a 2-part answer to my favorite parts of the job. I mean, the setting of getting to be a lawyer as a trial attorney in Philadelphia criminal courts is really exciting. I mean, it's the kind of place where it's super high octane. The volume of cases is really high. It's really fast paced. You have to be really sharp. And every day you get to try cases and make arguments and practice your skills in being an oral advocate. And, the cases that I have, some are tragic, on both sides, but others, it's fact is stranger than fiction. I'll leave it at that. And so the content of the work is always really interesting. And I also enjoy when that feeling of getting a just outcome in a case. That doesn't always mean a jury trial. Sometimes that could be, a plea deal for a case that is appropriate for both sides, certain treatment options. But that can also mean taking a case to trial, presenting it to a judge or a jury, and getting a finding of guilt when all the evidence compels it. I don't bring cases to that stage lightly. But my least favorite part is certainly when we don't get that outcome that we want, particularly for cases with victims. So this jury trial that I mentioned I had this week, the verdict was not guilty. We got it just a couple hours ago. And it was a case with a victim who was really traumatized and didn't find the outcome that we wanted in the courts. But I still find a lot of pride in everything that I did for the case, and sort of seeing this in the long game of it's about putting on the case the best way that you can, being honest, being fair. That's the most important thing. And even though it wasn't the verdict that I wanted, I left the case feeling like I did everything I could for the victim and giving the accused person a fair trial.
I would say the benefits of doing this work definitely far outweigh the hard parts. My favorite thing about the job, hands down, is meeting with people on the ground and talking to them about what they are experiencing. People come to you with messy fact situations, like the fact patterns you all get in law school exams, and they don't come to you with, I have a constitutional claim for X. Well, sometimes they do, and it's often wrong. So I think that when you're talking to people, it's just kind of disaggregating what they're experiencing and talking through that experience with them, translating that into legal claims, and also working with people that so many times, at least in my work, they have not had any positive interactions with the criminal legal system. And sometimes have never even felt like when they have representation, like people are caring about them or they're being listened to. There's just a lot of complexities there. I also really like being able to work on issues that are happening now. I mentioned filing the case for inclusive education in Oklahoma, and we were our team was the first team to challenge this, and we filed other challenges around the country. But it is very nice to look at an issue, realize that it's wrong, find a constitutional or statutory hook, and then sue. And I do like to sue people when they are doing things that I think violate people's rights. And that part never really gets old. And so I think that empowerment of working in partnership or on behalf of communities who often don't get that representation, especially for impact litigation, is something that I really like. What I don't like, or what can be especially hard, is that people come, as I said, with very messy fact patterns. And sometimes where I can come in and what I can litigate on is important, but it's not the most pressing need you have. Like, people have come to me because they're repeatedly being thrown in jail because they can't afford to pay their fines and fees. That is important. Like, I don't want you to be in jail. I don't want your driver's license to be suspended. But what they're actually most concerned about is that they lost custody of their children because they were thrown in jail for failure to pay. And that obviously has a much more important consequence for them. And that just could be beyond the scope of where my representation can reach. And that part is especially hard, just to know that there are limits to your work, and also think about what a blunt tool litigation is. And normally at the end of litigation, neither side is particularly thrilled about what we can obtain. And that can just be very hard for clients to both understand and accept, and hard for attorneys too, because we want to show up for our clients in the best way.
So I think that, winning just broadly is definitely the best part of my job. It doesn't happen as often as I wish it did, but that's what makes the victories all the more sweeter. I definitely really, if I can win a case at a preliminary hearing, it's just really excellent all around. I think I mentioned it. So if you're seeing me as your attorney, you are stuck at Rikers Island. You're not going to get off of Rikers Island until your parole case has ended. That can range from 15 days to months on end. So it's sometimes difficult for me and my colleagues to even define a win. For example, I had a case that went to trial, and all of these serious charges, which are essentially alleged assault, were dismissed. So we won. However, he was still in jail for 7 months with no possibility of getting off of Rikers Island. So at the end of the day, it's a grand assault with that win. And that's one of the hardest parts about my job, is that I definitely are dealing, I'm dealing with a lot of people just going through absolutely terrible things. And there are very limited tools that I have at my disposal to help them out. Um, you know, I've been doing this job the entirety of the time that I've been there. There's been a pandemic that's been raging through Rikers Island. People are very scared. If you read reports, violence at Rikers Island is higher than it has really ever been. There were a lot of deaths on the island. So there's a lot of heaviness that comes with, the job that I do. And it can be tough, because a lot of the time that I want to counsel somebody, I also have to keep in mind that, what they're telling me and the decisions that they're making it's being heavily impacted by, them being stuck in a crisis. So just making sure that, I'm doing everything in my power to help them, while also making sure that, they truly understand the consequences of decisions, which to me sometimes seem rash. I have people who, will want to do something just because, these parole cases can kind of hang around for a long time. But as an attorney, like, I know that's not necessarily a smart decision. So it's always balancing the personal aspect of, like, listen, I understand you're really trapped in the situation, and there's the human need to just do anything just to feel like you're not kind of rolling over in the situation. And then there's like the legal, arguments of, like, well, this is definitely not in your best interest, or it likely will not be, because there's little that is, so cut and dry in the job. So yeah, that's definitely the hardest part. And just, I try to be available for people.
Well, thank you all for sharing so openly and honestly. I think it's really important for students to know both the good sides and some of the tougher parts about pursuing public interest law, especially whenever I might be slightly biased when talking to them about different areas of law and mention public interest a little bit more than other private areas. Well, awesome. So you're all at prominent organizations or in district attorney's offices in one of the biggest cities in the country. I'm curious, what was the application process like? How did you get these awesome jobs?
So my application process was a little atypical as compared to most district attorneys' offices. I was able to get this job while I was still in law school. I interviewed for the job during the fall of my last year of law school, my third year. And that was because the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office was trying to recruit people from around the country to come to the office. So I was able to interview with someone on site at Vanderbilt Law School. And then I learned that I got the job. And so then I was able to prepare to take the bar exam in Pennsylvania, where I wouldn't have otherwise. I'm not from Pennsylvania and I don't have a connection here. So that's a little different than most DA's offices. In most DA's offices, it's a little bit of a reverse. You may have established a connection with the office during law school, but then knowing where you're going to be, you'll take the bar exam and then maybe they'll offer you a job. So that's a little more typical. But the interview process for most DA's offices is obviously, why do you want to be here? And then they will put you in some hypothetical situations to kind of test how you do on your feet, because that's a big part of this job, being thrown in and seeing if you can perform. And so that happened for my interview as well.
My interview process at the ACLU was a little bit different. The application process runs differently. I applied online. I did a few rounds of interviews, including an in-person interview shortly before the pandemic began. I think now our process is similarly run. Our team is comprised of staff attorneys, our director and deputy director, and then there are staff attorneys, fellows, interns, and staff. For the staff attorneys, most of the staff attorneys, I think we started hiring at 5 years and up, but I'm 11 years out and there's maybe 1 or 2 staff attorneys who are more junior than me. So it is kind of a position where we look for people to have a bit of experience under their belt coming in. We're looking for passion about racial justice, obviously. We're also looking for people who have experience doing impact litigation and running the types of investigations and litigation that we do. I think a big part of this is that there's not a lot of the way this team is structured. In the previous organization, I was at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. There was a lot of, which I like, there's a lot of autonomy over the work that you're doing and the types of cases that you're bringing, but you're really expected to come in and take over. And so making sure that you understand what's required, but also that you feel confident running litigation and investigations from soup to nuts is something that is really important. You don't have to have done every single thing, but I find that my experience in the private sector running international anti-corruption investigations is something that I draw upon here, especially just to know like what I should be doing next.
I think I also had a pretty atypical interview process. I had worked for a corporate law firm doing white collar litigation for about 1.5 years, and then I made this transition. And I think also just the hiring process for my unit is very different than it is for the rest of the greater organization, which has hundreds of attorneys. It's very large, but you know, I did an online application. I had, you know, really just one lengthy interview with the 2 heads of the unit and another staff attorney and paralegal. And, you know, I had also interned with the Legal Aid Society after my 1L year in law school. So I had a connection to the organization. And, you know, I got the job and I started. They definitely hire a lot of candidates from, you know, right out of law school. I think that, you know, having experience either through your internships or, you know, with clinics definitely helps to kind of bolster your resume coming to a position like this. And, you know, it's definitely, you know, sink or swim. They throw you into the deep end in PRDU and, you know, you have some support, but, you know, it's been definitely an interesting experience to join the unit.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing that. As a career counselor, I'm always very interested in the application process for these different positions and seeing how it changes from the undergrad level to the law school level. And speaking of law school, we've been talking a lot about your current experiences, current roles. We're gonna take it back in time to where the students are probably thinking more about, and that is choosing a law school. We're in the midst of a law school admission cycle right now. So I wanted to ask, why did you, I mean, you all went to amazing law schools, but why did you choose your law schools and what factors contributed to that decision?
Sure. So I chose to go to Vanderbilt Law School. So there was a natural bias there based on the great experience I had in undergrad. I'm what someone would call someone that went straight through. So I went directly to law school after undergrad. I applied to schools that were around the country, and the primary factors were the location, not only the location of the school, but the location of where people that go there end up. All law schools would give you that information. And I think, you know, many of us would agree that in the legal profession, there are obviously certain jobs and certain schools that you can go anywhere, but a lot of it is really local in terms of where you think you might want to be. You should go to law school there. But I chose to go to Vanderbilt because of the size of the school. I knew I wanted a smaller environment with fewer students, as well as the course offerings. A lot of law school courses are all pretty similar, but I liked some of the course offerings that were a little more specialized, and I liked the student to faculty ratio. I thought I could get a better experience there. And then the third factor is kind of just the vibe. I liked the people that I met at Vanderbilt Law School. I knew it had a reputation of being a collegial place, somewhere where the students got along. It wasn't a cutthroat environment. And I knew that was something that I knew I would do better in that kind of environment. But I also love Vanderbilt, and so I went there again.
Looking back to when I was applying to law schools, I had various criteria in mind for what I wanted. I think I applied to 14 or 15 law schools. It was a bunch. And I took a similar approach in some ways to Jacqueline. I looked through to see which schools had coursework or programs related to social justice issues that I was interested in. I did Teach for America after Bandy, and so I had some time to really think through things, and I was looking for like a social justice track that kind of resonated. When I was at Bandy, I wanted to be a reporter. So I was also looking to see if they had like a media or journalism in the law program as well. So I looked at the coursework. I looked at the number of clinics, which worked out because Harvard has a ton of clinics. I did 4 while I was there for credit and 1 as a club volunteer. So I was able to get a really diversified experience with regard to what it meant to actually do this type of work, that I thought was really helpful. I think ultimately when I applied, I wasn't thinking that I would go to HLS, and I wasn't really interested in, they kept, they'll call and recruit you afterwards. And I would just give a lot of reasons, like, you don't have this, you don't have that, whatever. And the answer was always like, yes, yes, we have it, we can do it, we can make it happen. And I felt like that kind of resonated with throughout my experience, that if there was something that I wanted to do or wanted to create, normally it was there, but if not, there was space to do that. And I ended up really liking, once I got there, we are the biggest law school, and I really liked that because there were so many people to meet and different pathways, and something I could drill down in smaller classes, like once you get out of 1L, but it is something to consider whether or not you want to, like where you're going to learn best, and trying to drill down on like having options. I also considered and did take advantage of the opportunity to take classes like across the other grad schools, which was really helpful too. So that was something else I thought about.
Yes, I also was drawn to, my school, NYU's, just reputation for having really good public interests programs, and, a tilt to have a student body that is definitely public interest oriented. The clinic offerings there are, really great. And I also just, I love New York City. I've, remained in New York City since graduation, and, it was hard for me to turn down an opportunity to get to spend some time there. So yeah, I think that was, one of the major factors for me. I also had visited. I really liked the vibe. I spoke with some students there, and everybody just seemed relaxed. It's a little larger in hindsight than I think was maybe the best for me. However, I definitely made it work, and I made really strong bonds with other students, and I think that they have a lot of good resources that if you want to, and you have some knowledge of, then you can definitely take advantage of those resources. And also just looking at where people who attended NYU Law ended up. I'm from outside of Philadelphia, so I knew it would be easy for me to land jobs either in New York or somewhere along the Northeast where my roots are. So that was definitely another major factor.
Can I circle back on one of my answers?
Please, please.
So I do think, as Jacqueline and Evan said, it is important to think about, all the schools will tell you they're collegial and they get along, but I think it's important to think about the ways that the schools invest in students. And it is always great to visit the schools, but I think some schools are more intentional about creating space for students to just interact. And for us, that looked like, the ways that they structure the sections and the types of events that they would put money towards to make sure that the main value is like getting to know each other. We also don't have grades, which was also kind of attractive, though that happened my 1L year, for thinking about what it means to have a non-competitive environment, but I don't think I understood applying how much I would appreciate that being there, like being a place where you want students to interact and you want them to be happy, and you will, if you need to put money towards that, you'll do that.
Awesome. Yeah, all great criteria that I encourage all students listening to write down and think about whenever you're considering law schools. And that actually leans into our next question perfectly. So we've talked about a few size of the school, grading, competition, the parent foci of the school in different areas. Are there any other criteria that you think are really important for students to assess when choosing a law school outside of those that we've discussed?
Yeah, the first thing that I touched on this a little bit, but location, if you know where you want to be. If you're from Missouri and you know you want to go back to Missouri and work there, you going to a school that has connections to that state may put you in a better position to get a job that you want. And if so, I think if location is important to you, really looking at schools in that area will be key. So much of hiring is local. The legal communities are relatively small, even in big cities like Philadelphia. And so the location of the school can be really important if you have a specific idea of where you want to be. And you can get that information from schools because they'll publish where their students end up. And that can be really helpful if you have a really specific idea of where you want to be. I think another really important factor is cost. And everybody has to evaluate their own personal circumstances of how important that is. But it's a huge factor. And I think particularly if you're interested in pursuing public service, none of us have said this outright, but we're paid less than people that work for law firms or work for companies. And so you might want to think, if you know you really want to do that work, going to a school that will give you the most money may put you in a more comfortable situation down the road. It's not fatal to take out loans or to count on public loan forgiveness. But I wouldn't. It's a big factor. And particularly if you want to, say, work as a public defender in St. Louis, Missouri, going to a school that will give you the most money and prepare you to do that work, you can put yourself in a really good position. So I think obviously the prestige of the school is important, but being a lawyer is being a lawyer, and you can get that education anywhere. So kind of look at what you might want to do. If you don't know, then those aren't factors. So I think don't worry if a factor that one of us has said doesn't apply to you because you don't know. That's totally okay. I didn't know what I wanted to do or where I wanted to be.
Yeah, I think all of that is very important. Going back to the schools conversation, there are schools that have more robust programs for people who want to do public interest work. I think in addition to the normal loan forgiveness, HLS will pay for your third year of law school if you commit to 5 years of public interest work, which is something that a lot of people took advantage of. And that's just one of many programs. I will say, though, it is really important to think about where you want to end up. As Jacqueline said, if you want to be a public defender in Missouri, then that makes sense. I think there's also, if you know that you want to end up at certain in a certain field, I think it's worthwhile looking at where people go to school in that field, because their prestige can be important in some fields where there's a cutoff and the schools jobs or organizations will only accept students from certain schools. I personally think that's outdated, and I'm trying to work against that. But just recognizing that sometimes that is something that comes up. And I don't necessarily think that it's always intentional about like just having the ranking as much as it is having some of the opportunities to work on journals. Like everyone can work on a journal, or everyone can do clinics and what those the ways that you're able to leverage those opportunities to make yourself competitive is definitely not required. And I don't think that you should take out tons of loans if to do something if you're not sure you want to. But if it is a good fit, it might be something that's worthwhile considering.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to what has been said, because I definitely agree with all of it. I think if you are interested broadly in the law, and you don't have, necessarily a clear path, it's always good to go somewhere that has, a broad range of offerings. And also, I don't think that it hurts to take some time to work, close to an organization that you're interested in, because whether you're a paralegal there or just some part of the staff, you'll get a sense of how that specific organization operates. And also, I'm sure they are not very different from other organizations operating in that same space. It's something that, in hindsight, I wish I maybe had taken another year. I went and did like a volunteer program for a year and then went to law school. But I think when I looked at my classmates who were, a little more experienced in the world and who had, worked a job or two, they were able to come into law school with, concrete ideas of what they wanted, how to achieve it, and also how to make those connections, because, law school is a great place to make connections, either with your classmates or with, people who come to events, speakers who come to your law school. So there's a lot of opportunities that a law school can offer you that aren't, necessarily in the classroom. And, it's a little helpful to have some, world experience to navigate those aspects of law school as well, because they really can be just as important as your grades when it comes to getting a job. And, that's what people go to law school for. Ultimately, it's to get a job. And looking at employment numbers and bar passage rates is always good. But, that's not necessarily the best, factor for you deciding, because those things, in my opinion, are indicative of how much work, the student body is going to be putting in. And if you're willing to put in the work, or unwilling to put in the work, it doesn't matter what law school you go to. But, certain other factors such as, who comes to campus and who is, what doors are opened up, those can definitely factor in.
Yeah, all great criteria to evaluate and assess whenever you're thinking about what law schools to apply. And the good news for all Vanderbilt students is you can come and talk to me about them anytime. We can navigate your priorities and the different criteria you're thinking about when you're deciding which schools to apply to or which schools to attend. So yeah, thank you all. And the last question, if you could all give one piece of advice to a student who's either about to apply to law school or is about to attend law school, what would it be? And you can think about it if you need to.
I would advise, if maybe you're in the middle of your undergrad career and you think you might have an interest in law school, you can fuel that interest, not necessarily by taking every pre-law class or what you think that is, or focusing so much on what it's going to be like in law school. I think instead you should focus on your interests, whatever those interests are. When you go to law school, it does not matter what you majored in. Everybody starts at the same place, and there's a learning curve for everyone. So I really focus on your interests, focus on how to pursue those and how to work hard, and then you'll have this skill that you need to apply to being in law school. And just piggybacking on what Evan talked about, I think getting exposure to legal work environments can be really helpful. Whether you get that in undergrad or through taking some time off between undergrad and law school, you'll have a better idea of what you might want to do after law school.
Yeah, I think it's most important to just figure out what your passions are and what drives you. And when you have that in mind, you can make all of the other pieces move. You're not going to break your career because you chose one law school over another. You might change the path, you might make it longer or shorter or, whatever. But I don't think there's a way to break your career when there's something that you really want. And law schools are looking for people who are passionate about something. It doesn't have to be the same thing. Tons of people on my team now tried to create documentaries before they went to law school, which is just kind of random because it's unrelated. But it's whatever you want to do. I think that it's just thinking through how to get there, and you don't have to have the whole plan figured out. It's fine to say, I want to go to law school. I'm going to figure out where I will go to law school. And I know I have this big goal, but you don't have to have the whole plan figured out from start to finish. You can figure it out by being deliberate and thinking about, is this step going to bring me closer to my goal? But I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. And you don't have to become a paralegal or something in order to go. So there's a lot of flexibility in figuring out what drives you and just working hard for it.
I would definitely recommend that you really take the time and invest in, doing well on the LSAT. I found in my experience that the LSAT, it should not be this way, but it is weighted very, very heavily in law school admissions. And, it's a tough test, but, I think that, if you are well prepared for it, it could really open up some doors. Even if, your either undergrad GPA or resume, you might feel is lacking an LSAT score, can, make up some ground there. And, it's worth either, going too hard and, taking like 25 LSATs, why not? Because I found that it's just, a very important piece that law schools will consider. And, you do have the ability to, get ahead of that, and, put the time in.
Awesome. All great advice again. You three are killing it. Great panelists, top tier. We have just 5 minutes left. I want to ask the students in the audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to put on your camera and ask the questions. If I understand if you're not comfortable doing that, you can submit them through the chat and I'll ask them. But yeah, any questions from our students? Maddie, what's up?
Hi. So my question was just how, I know public interest law is a very wide field. There's a lot of different kind of areas within it where you can specialize. How did you end up in your specific areas of public interest? What drew you to that?
We can just adopt the same sequence. So I was drawn to being a prosecutor first because I was interested in being a trial attorney. I actually started at Vanderbilt in Blair. I was a voice student, and so I was always interested in performance. And being a trial attorney is really the next best thing. So first I was interested in the kind of work that I was doing. And then I was drawn to being a prosecutor because I've always been interested in government service. And it's a really important job. It's really hard, but I knew I wanted that kind of challenge in my work. So it's kind of two-part: one, the setting, but two, the kind of work it was.
I was very interested in systemic change on behalf of communities of color. And as I dug deeper into some of the high profile incidents of unarmed people being killed by police, I was really interested in police brutality. I found that kind of an entry point into our criminal legal system had to do with court debt and the criminalization of poverty. And so for me, it made sense if we can remove this as one entry point, maybe we can start to address the broader issues. But really, I was just looking for what might be a place where I could personally make a difference.
Yes, I had some experience with direct client representation. When I was doing corporate law, I felt very removed from what I had always considered to be like the real lawyering, where you're in the courtroom, you're having client interactions, and you're doing, and that's what I had originally come to law school to do, to be an advocate for people who maybe didn't have resources. And, I just found this position where it was really high paced and really interesting work, and, definitely guaranteed to be a very interesting and also useful in terms of learning experience.